Okay, I think almost everybody knows of Lou's two books, Lou and Allen, Lake Boone. Well, let's get right to it. I think, how many came to the first? What were the rest of you doing? Jeez. Okay. Well, if you did, we made the setting of Lake Boone, a little bit about the geology. The lake is here, and we are on the Assabet River, which flows southeast to north, southwest to northeast, joins the Sudbury River at Concord to form the Concord. And where does the Concord go? Merrimack. And where does the Merrimack go? To the ocean at Newburyport, Plum Island. That will figure prominently next time. You'll see how. But anyway, okay. I always point this out. Here's the town line between Hudson and Stowe, and this little jog keeps popping up, and it helps kind of in placing you on the maps, which you'll see. Okay, a little bit of cartography, map making, map drawing. In the old days, now virtually all done by computer. Not particularly well, but done by computer. This is the very earliest map that we've got. Here's that jog. Here is the lake, Boone's Pond, 70 acres. It was an original. This is the little finger. Mike here up there at the top in the cove. The dotted line, we're not used to a dotted line, but this is actually the river coming up through here. I can't figure out what this is. I've stared at it, but it doesn't come through. But it's some sort of mill, and that, of course, is Gleasondale. Here's the river looping around, and the lake empties into it, always did, and then it flows off north. This printing is, apparently it's rubbed out, but rods wide. In other words, just the width of the river. How much is a rod? 16 and a half feet. Quarter of a chain. You knew that? Yeah, of course. Okay, here's the lake. Over here, just on the very corner, there's a dotted line which is labeled road. Here's White Pond. This is the town line between Marlborough and Stowe. This is long before Hudson appeared on the map. Here's a little later map, 1830. Here is our jog again. Rather nicely laid out, beginning to look rather familiar. Here is the Rock Bottom Factory, an early name for Dottie, Gleasondale. And here is the river flowing up to the northeast. And here's the lake, a little better defined, but it's only here. This is town line between Stowe and Marlborough, running right along here. Here is what we now know as Bailey's Brook. This is 1830, before any of the dams were built. Now on this map, we see some dotted lines. Here they are roads. And I'm going to zoom in a moment and we'll see a little more. But I call your attention, right here it says Boone's Plain in red. It's very hard to see. But if we zoom in a little closer, we get some very interesting detail, a lot of trees. And to help put you, this is Sudbury Road, Boone's Plain, over the top. Here is Whitman's Crossing on the Assabet, and the road continues as Boone Road. Down here, and again, here's our town line. We've got this sort of squiggle. Just draw your attention to it now. We'll see it again. But there is a dotted line here, which turns out to be a road. And I've got a asterisk here, where this road crosses Sudbury Road. You'll see the reason for that in a moment. Well, without reading all of this, but the important part of this is from a book, Stowe, written by Preston Crowe in 1933, and that turns out to be important. But what this is a description of the path, if you like, from here down along the river, across Bailey's Brook, down and to this point here, and actually continues on. And without reading all of the details, but here is an important point that will come up later. They're talking about the south side of Boone's Pond. This is now the reservoir, which was built 71 years ago. Well, that was in 1933. So this is dated to 1862, which I think is the second dam which raised the lake to its present size. So if we follow that description, what we ultimately come to, and I don't know if anybody recognizes this, but this is near where Wes Fisher lives. I think it's actually his view across the south part of the first basin. The first basin is here to the left. Actually, this is the Narrows to the right, and we're looking directly across at what is popularly referred to, or at least some, as the gully. And in that long description, which I skipped over, they talk about this gully. And where is all of this going? This is the route that is thought that Nathaniel Boone took when in 1660 or so, when the Indians were coming after him. And it follows up here, probably not current Kingland Road. This is a really reasonably recent road. But this description ends that he was killed by the Indians, Native Americans, in a slough on Sudbury Road. And if you know the Kingland-Sudbury Road intersection, there's a vernal pool right there. So this may be that spot. But who's to argue? I'm still looking for the air photo. Okay, moving on. Marlborough, 1835. This is the next map. This is really interesting. This is Fort Meadowbrook, which is right about here is Gospel Hill. Oh, sorry, it's going to be over here. Here is Lower Main Street. Here is the old Poor Farm. Now it is self-storage, if you know what we're talking about there. This, David Hunter, a lot of this land was owned by Hunter, as in Hunter Road. This will become Parmenter Road a lot later. White Pond Road. But here now we've got what is labeled Ramshorn Brook, 1835. This is before any dam was built at Bailey's Brook. So it was just a brook at that time. Now, it's kind of a neat map. You really wish, well, why didn't they go over to the other side? Well, they didn't. But the best I could do was that. That's roughly just a sketch, but approximately so, because as some of you know, areas around Indian Point up here were in Hudson, although they're on the Stowe side. And there was a lot of stuff over here on the Hudson side, which was technically Stowe. It was kind of a mess. Here's the next map a few years later. And again, what we're trying to do is figure out when the lake grew to its current size. Here's still 1844. Here's still that first basin, the original basin, with its outlet. which we now call Bailey's Brook. Here is the inlet. And remember that little jig that was on that earlier map? That would have been this. Here is the town line. And this is White Pond. Now on this, I'm not quite sure whether they have these two joined. They don't. At least on the surface they don't. Probably the aquifer joins, but there's no surface connection. And here is that road that we spoke about before. This is Sudbury Road, here. So this was labeled on the earlier map Ramshorn Brook, now known as Second Basin and Third. Wouldn't it be interesting if the lake indeed had to be drained? No. Interesting. I didn't say good idea. To see, well, yeah, all kinds of, well, forget that idea. That was not a good suggestion. Okay, 1852. If you came for the last time, there was a lot of talk about the Cochituate Water Board buying the water rights for the lake and for Fort Meadow for reasons that don't concern us now. But the point here is, here's 1852. Now we do know that there was one dam, low dam, built on Bailey's Brook. But here they show the whole lake. I don't believe it. I don't believe it was that big at that time. They could easily calculate where it would be if it were dammed up. But I think this is way too early. But it's confusing. It does not help in trying to figure out when the lake became this big. This is now the current town line. So this is Hudson, which actually hadn't been on the map until 15 years later. 1886. This is from the first comprehensive atlas of the state. Of course, anything you're looking for in a map is always on 2 sheets. If you're lucky, it's only on 2 as opposed to 4. Well, here's the break, right here. So on this map, we have a very recognizable first basin. And in 1886, we have still Ramshorn Brook. I don't believe that either. I think by this time, it was definitely flooded back. But of course, simply because the map was published then doesn't mean it was surveyed at that point. So, 1889, here we are. Here is the river, Sudbury Road. A lot of interesting stuff on this map. Here's the first basin, and here is our Ramshorn Brook here, showing not to have been flooded as late as 1889, 1890. I think it was then, but there was quite a delay between when things happened on the ground and when they actually mapped them. But at any rate, here's Lower Main Street. Here's the almshouse, which, the old poor farm. And Sudbury Road, the Parker, had moved in by then here. Menser, why does that name sound familiar? Graves, remember the graves off, I think it's Lakewood. And Mr. Potter up here, who was a watchman on the railroad, right here, on Whitman's Crossing. We have Uncle Jerome Barton's driveway coming down here. Uncle to who? You'll see in a moment. The other one I call your attention to is Beatty over here. This is the Beatty Farm, now known as Honeypot. let's see. Well, moving on. That's Barton Road, or will be Barton Road. It wasn't quite on the map then. Okay, well, here we are. This is a similar map. These are the USGS maps. This is 1894. Here is our break. That's why it looks a little strange. The lake here, but still, it hadn't flooded. And I'm convinced by this late date, there was a second basin and third. This little squiggle right here is very unusual. On these maps, you hardly ever see it, but this is what would be called a cart path. This is about where Collings New Road is. It's unrelated to that road, but it's approximately in that location. And it's interesting because, see, the railroad was here by that time. And this was very likely a short dirt path people would have taken to get off the train at Ordway to go to the lake. We do know by turn of the century, for a lot of reasons, one of them being pictures, that we had a full lake, certainly by 1912. This is a very interesting map. It lists depths. It was done by State Fish and Game, who did a lot of fish stocking. And they have all the records. And all of this printing are the kinds of trees that were around. That's what they were talking about. Down here it says public boathouse and store. Monahans, not yet, but to be. And also here it is public boat house and stop, actually on the river. Okay, real quick. George Barton, nephew to Uncle Jerome, he came from Sudbury. He's born up on Pantry Brook, and came over because his uncle was on the lake on Boone Hill. Obviously roamed around. He was a geologist, so he was out in the field. Must have wandered over to the Beatty farm because he married Emma Beatty in 1884. We talked about this before. The mill in, excuse me, the mill in Maynard was off and on. Civil War, it really got started back up again. This is why I think the second dam, because he had permission to raise it, but there is no record that he actually built it. But they didn't really care when people built it, because the only documentation you get is a license or an agreement to do something. But this seems just about right. So there was an original small dam and a much larger one. So I think from Civil War on, despite what those maps say, I think it was pretty much the lake as it is. James Parker comes in very early, one of the first. Maynard, which has a lot to do with the lake. The Central Mass Railway comes, Ordway Station and the Gleasondale Station, especially Ordway, for those of us on our side of the lake. George Barton puts up the monument. Everybody been to the monument? How many of you have poison ivy from the damn monument? Yes. Who's supposed to take care of that monument anyway? Anybody from the town know? I assume it's private. Whoa, really?
If we knew any town officials, maybe we could ask.
Yeah, wow. Well, I don't know any. Okay, Jackson Camp on Pine Point, early. Maynard. Amory Maynard goes away. Bolam's Home Cafe built. We have pictures of that, but next time. And American Woolen, turn of the century. Things beginning to happen. The lake is beginning to be discovered by city folks. Electricity comes in so that you really didn't need water power anymore. For that purpose, still used water, but for a different reason that we'll see. And beginnings of newspaper, and a lot of our records come from that. Well, this is George Barton, very influential man, went to MIT, became one of the first geologists, helped establish the geology department at MIT. And if you go to the Sudbury Library, and there's special collections, you go in, you can look through this. This is all his materials, because he was born in Sudbury. Oh yes, there it is. So we tried to trace what we thought might have been Matthew Boone's route. Okay, now we begin to get to more interesting stuff. Turn of the century, 31 families in 1900. A couple of launches, we'll look at some pictures. First Labor Day, very early. Twilight Club. Land development, we've got sketches of all of these. Canning's Grove, 1905, 1910. Don't have any pictures of Canning's Grove. Have ads, and we know some of the people who were there, but I don't have any pictures of it. 1910, 146 cottages. Lake Boone has been ranked as one of the most densely settled lakes in the state. And early, I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of building recently, but it's all infill, and much of it's on the other side of the road. So it's been developed early and for a long time. A launch from Maynard, big fire. There were many fires. A big one affected us personally. Yeah. 1918, State Waterways reports 107 acres. Well, certainly by that time it was its current size of 160 plus. Okay, you could come to Lake Boone on a launch from Maynard. If you know, and we talked about it last time, this is the car barn for the Concord, Maynard, and Hudson on the corner of 62 and 117 at the Ben Smith Dam. There's now a big mill building there. This is the back side of it, so we're looking at the mill building. The Ben Smith Dam is off to the left. So that was the launch. Terrible picture, sorry about that. That's kind of the site of where that was taken before. This is the back of that mill building. These are the barrels to keep you from going over the dam. Okay, here is the earliest plan of development. Now, just because there was a plan didn't mean houses were built yet, but this was the layout. Theodore Temple, which we'll see his plan in a moment. David Goodale owned much of the land on the west side there. This is Lower Main Street. Probably can't read it. This is East Ave, and originally West Ave, not any longer. Fire department wanted it changed because it sounded too much like something uptown, so it's called Lake Boone Drive. And that's about the best I can do. So this is Worcester Ave. And Hunter comes in about here. This is about where those people live. Yes. Interesting, people bought alternate lots. Oh my God, there's a Spalding involved here. Geez, Dot, you guys were everywhere. But it's interesting, a lot of these names figure prominently, especially Malter. For those of you who are familiar with this part, Hunter Ave and Worcester, Malta was a big name for small houses. And I think many of you might know, this is labeled public landing here, so it's in effect a right-of-way. Okay, jumping over towards the dam, the Barton land. Here is the Dam Cove. And the, is there a name for that cove to the north, or is it just, no, I don't think so. At any rate, here's Barton Road. Here's the dam, right here. This is American Woolen Dam. This is labeled Gatehouse. Some of you are old enough to remember that great big metal tank, rusting tank that was there for years. Yeah, he's really old. He remembers. Oh, God. Well, that's because you're old. No. Nope. This was a surveyor sketch. And there's a lot more of it. This is just the piece. But look how, and this was 1905. And some of these show houses. Dot, you're here. And show quite a few houses. Porches scattered around. So somewhere here, I'm not sure, probably this one would be Pine Point. And then a whole series of these things. This is a stone wall, which I think is probably long gone. But I think that's a right-of-way. But anyway, this is Temple's plan. No houses shown, although there are a few names. This is Monahans Cove over here. This is Temple. Goes right to the water, although I'm not sure you can do that now. Doesn't seem as if you can. And here's Worcester. So Temple had the inside big corner. Somewhere probably about here will be Monahans. And the rink will be somewhere right about here.
I think the road on the maps today still goes down to the water. Because this property with the two houses on the corner, and if the road goes straight down through the water.
It's not a road, kind of just grass.
Right, right. But I think technically, even though it's built to sort of overgrown, if you look at the assessor's map, it's still a road.
It's amazing how many real roads on the map don't appear as real roads on the ground. And that's, I think, by design or neglect to keep those people, that element out. Yes. Surprise. Okay. This was 1922. Driveway from Maine is Temple, named for Hiram Temple, who built the first cottage. Worcester was named after George Worcester, first to buy and build on the Temple land. The new road, so-called, is an old right-of-way, part of the Hunter estate, now owned by Brock, blah, blah. Yeah. Hunter Ave is quite new, not until the 30s. In the past 20 years, many have come to the lake and originated names to suit their own whims, but the old names still stand, nevertheless. Okay, another rather large development is Lakeside, and this was early. This is from 1901. This is a sort of a prospectus. I don't know how many here. Lakeside Farms, John Dalton was one of the key people. I don't know if anybody remembers Nancy Hanslip, old timer. She was a Dalton. And this was a letter down here, see if the town will improve Lower Main Street, now where the Lake Boone General Store is. This is a very interesting map. Get you oriented. This is the second basin. We're over, kind of standing over North Shore Drive, running along here, running along the bottom. So this is Lower Main Street. This is pretty much what will happen with Lakeside, and loops back out long before the roads were laid out. These were all just dirt roads in those days. Interesting here in that the red are houses, the yellow are the privies. that went with the houses. Here is the Princess Dock, which we will mention next time. And the reason this became important is partly for the people here, but mostly for the ball field. There was quite a lot of talk about the ball field, and that is now just about where Rock Avenue and Lakeside come together. Horse barn and wagon, let's see, Birch's, present stone house. That's actually my house. And we love this. Red house here, a drunk house, but burnt by the Lakeside men one night to get rid of a bad neighbor. The beauty is it names some of the cottages, and you can read, and there was a lot of chatty news in the newspapers in the 20s, 30s, 40s, that people were returning to their cottage and had names. I wish we knew more, but here we know at least some of them. This is an interesting map. This was made by Richard Butler. My mother was a butler. This was her older sister. And he did this in 1982 from memory. Right here, this is where Lakeside and Gately come together. That's where Connie skis from. Yep. It was filled in. Now, as I go through here, some of you are far more familiar with certain sections of the lake and the others, no clue. So, okay, here is the 1909. Here is the first layout of the lakeside area. This was about 43 acres total. To help you, Main Street is up here, actually up off the top. This is Lakeside. Here, this is Gately. And here is Rock. Somebody actually drew these in. This is actually a paper street. There were a few houses here, just a few. But in the old days, they did this. They drew the house, and they also drew the porch. Kind of neat. It was very... probably. Yes. Yeah. And you all would know that. It's a famous house, since one of your selectmen grew up in that house till we ran him off and he went elsewhere. Monahans Cove over to the right. By 1921, the land really got chopped up. Here is Lakeside. Here is Rock Avenue. The rest of these are paper streets. Gately is going to be over here. And Gately goes right to the water, kind of like that, I think what we now call Kane Landing, over on, we used to be Oakmore. Damn small. Let me see. 60, probably 20 by 50, 30 by 50. But some of them were combined. Because I'm now right about here in these several lots, so it's hard to tell what happened. A lot of them got put together. The real interesting part of this map is that. Now, I had to turn the map over because the first one I showed you had the lake at the bottom. This one was done the other way, so I flipped it over. That's why things are upside down. But there are farm buildings here. And you know that now as the Lake Boone General Store. It was a farm. Some really old people around will remember it before Joseph Goldman came with his couple of sons, Sam most notably, bought that and built the Sam's Provisions. Very interesting story. Yes. Well, even before the Quonset hut, drove around in a truck and home delivered. And I have a few very poor pictures, but I'd love pictures of some of these things, but they just don't seem to exist. I interviewed Bob Goldman, the youngest brother, and heard from Mrs. Goldman. Oh, I think we had pictures, but we threw them out. Okay. Well, perhaps you came to the lake this way. This was the launch. We are now back at Whitman's Crossing. We are in the river. The launch wasn't that big. You saw a poor picture of it before. But here's the train. You may not recognize that picture. Here is Sudbury Road, and here's the crossing, the bridge. Another view of pretty much that. You were down on the river here before. Here's the station. This is the end of Barton Road coming down the hill. Here is Sudbury Road. I haven't seen this gal around lately. That's pretty much what it's like now. Yes. And the railroad would be just about like that. Another view, unfortunately, again, kind of faded, but it's what we get. Here's the station. Mr. Potter was there for a long time as the crossing guard, but you probably know it better as that. Moving over to Parmenter Road, talking about railroads. This is the famous Ordway House. The Ordways were very important to the development here. There was often question, not often, but there was question, why was it Ordway? Why not stop at what was the Poor Farm, which was on the main street? And we had that little sketch before with a little dotted line leading up. Well, it turned out that Mr. Ordway negotiated with the railroad to have it stop here so we'd get the business. And that house, now the O'Neill House, beautiful house, very nice. And here's the railroad crossing, little hump on the road here. You may know this much better because it came up in connection with Eversource. Enough said.
So that's Parmenter Road looking towards
Main Street, correct. Yep. Here was one of the first launches around the lake. Steam boiler. (1910) license, town granted license, provisions of the Commonwealth, blah, 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 to Bolam and Mitchell as owners, and Lawrence Cattell, captain of the gasoline launch Princess, to carry 50 passengers with 35 life preservers. 1910. When? 1912. Knew Larry Cattell, worked with him back in the 60s, pulling stumps down in that end of the lake where those people live, as did he. At any rate, the next talk, we're going to take that boat, we'll get rid of those people, and take a trip around the lake, and that will be what we do next time. 35 people there. Can you imagine sticking 15 more in that thing? I think that's why they probably only did 35, because I'm not sure you could get 15 more in there. At any rate, scooting around the lake, right up at the very north end, graves, that's the little cemetery, not the name of the people. This was the landing. Mike Perishow is going to be right up here to the right. You're looking across to Pine Point Road. I think Dave Gray's going to be off to the right there somewhere. That's about where we are now. There were all kinds of things that popped up from time to time. This was Butler's Landing. Remember, Mother was a butler? And this was her sister-in-law. And this turned out to be at Butler's Landing, which was a stop on the Princess. And it would stop here, because there was a bunch of people here. This was the original family house grandfather bought in '09. Check this out. The problem with pictures now is trees. Okay, so-called Indian Point or Canning's Grove, so-called, what was it, Blind Curve? Didn't somebody ask about that at the, yes, at the Lake Boone Commission meeting? This was run, among others, by Benjamin Lovett. Benjamin Lovett was a very interesting man. Let me see if this is going to work.
On the ocean wave. Two-head ladies cross over and by the gentleman stand.
He's doing the calling.
And all join hands. Honor your corner, lady. Honor your partners all. Swing the corner, lady, and promenade the hall. Two-head gents cross over and by that lady stand.
This is what they would have done at Canning's Grove. I suspect they did not do ballroom dancing, but rather square dancing, which was very popular at that time. In fact, Benjamin Lovett was noticed by Henry Ford, who at that time in the 20s was building down the street in Sudbury. He came, he believed very much in American culture, and he hired Benjamin Lovett, brought him to Dearborn, and had him teach Ford employees square dancing. Well, there's another one, but we need to move on. First Water Carnival, 1903, was pretty early. 10 years later, they had the surprise 10th anniversary. They were printing up programs. And one of the things swimming, diving, water, and many of us who lived on the lake for a long time remember the Labor Day events, which were held at the Association Field, or we swam at Hanson's Beach. But we swam from the dock in. This is what they did back in George Barton's day. They started from the Twilight Club Wharf. That's where Shirley Birchfield West Fisher lived, on the Narrows. They took the canoe, went down the dam, one boat, over the dam, Bailey's Brook, down the river, Whitman's Crossing, carried the thing back up, put it in, and went back. And the other, I assume the other canoe did just the opposite, so they weren't bumping into each other. One canoe made it in less than 20 minutes. I don't think you could do that if you ran. Oh yeah, starting to have problems. 1914, it came about mayhem. Selectmen voted to appoint to Chief Light Mr. Stronach as police officer, and all kinds of problems began to happen. One of the other things that happened were fires, which happened all the time because they were smokestacks, and smokestacks lit the trees along the way. One of the big ones, 1917, started over somewhere around Ordways, burnt across what is now the State Forest, across what is now Main Street, right to the lake. Mother was born in 7, so she was 10 when this one happened. And according to her, she very well remembers all the kids. Because it was May, the people were up. All the kids were gathered, put into boats, sent out into the lake. What this did is it burnt grandfather's house, that house that you saw that was up behind the boathouse, and a bunch of others. Oh, yes. A couple more boat license. Larry wasn't running the only boat. Chief of police notified storekeepers at Boone's Pond. More problems down here. Lake Boone, patrons of store causing disturbance after hours. Can you imagine? Matter referred to the chief. 1920s, tremendous amount of building. Here's a very happy looking Frank Kane. And this was kind of he was remembering back. And he developed around Oakmore, Worcester, and Hunter. Harry Davis building like crazy. Thomas Haley building. 30 cottages owned by the Parkers. Just an enormous amount of building in the 1920s. The other thing that happened in the early 20s, the Pavilion Promenade. That's here. This is when the dance hall pavilion built. Interestingly, this is the same year the Hudson Movie Theater was built. Foley Store, later Monahans, went through several iterations. Lake Boone Association, its predecessor. Oh, the first murder. We'll get to those in a moment. The Lake Boone Lodge, wonderful picture of it over there. The dance hall changed hands. The lodge burns. Charter of the Lake Boone Improvement Association, 1921. Forget Louis Levine, but Stevens, Rice, Harris, Ahern, Chrysler, and Butler. Kind of sounds like a cabal, all these Germans. Louis Levine, very interesting guy. He was the cashier of Boston Gas, which in those days meant treasurer. So these were all Boston men who obviously knew each other in the early days and came out here as a group. Lake Boone, this is very early Lake Boone Association. Barton, Rock, Estabrook, Howe, McSweeney, Ahern, Lombard, Mitchell, Chamberlain. Do we see a pattern here? There's lots of this. Very helpful. Lake Boone notes. This went on for years. Every week there would be notes about who came, what was happening. And this had to do with the opening of the dance hall. They don't write much like this anymore. The front of the pavilion was festooned with a variety of incandescent lamps, and the entrance and foyer were effulgent in electric rays. And of course, that was here. There's Monahans Cove, the second basin. Turned out Monahan was a cigar maker. Run by Foley. This is 1921. Well, of course, as many of these things, it burned, gone. Daniel Foley of the Cove Landing Caravansary. So if any of you are into words, that's not a word we see much of anymore. And of course, it came from caravans across the desert where you could go in and acted actually as an inn as well. Lots of things beginning to happen. Virgilio Mulcher is erecting a cottage, well, by many. Dr. Multy was a dentist. Blandon's grocery store, Birmingham store. There were lots of little stores scattered around. It wasn't just a Monahans. There were many others that popped up. Many of them did not last long. New cottage. Over here is a, didn't mean to move. Here is Pine Point. We're back on the first basin. Here is the famous sandbar. Interesting picture. I managed to get Maureen and Shane Walsh to walk out to the end and took a picture of them. It's kind of about as much as I can get there. One of the things that happened, and I suspect the reason this showed at this point is, even though the Maynard Mills did not need it for water power, what they did need the lake for was to do washing of the wool and get rid of the dyes and effluent that they ran downstream. So they would drain the lakes, and there are several reports in the paper when places burnt, fire department came, no lake, just gone, and then it filled up again. Yeah, you run it, you see this. Water from Fort Meadow was used, and it simply went dry. This was in the 30s. Oh, here we are. This is the Lake Boone Lodge. This is Lakeside Ave here. If some of you are familiar with it, this is just about the turn on Lakeside, and Monahans Cove is off to your left. Looking back. This is a picture. This was from Uncle's collection. This is the lodge, and I think we're in the winter. It kind of feels like it. That's long gone, but this is still here. This is the Chason house now. And go and talk to Jennifer. The footprint, the cement footprint of the hotel is still there. And that was located there. Okay, the lodge, like a lot of places in those days, right to the ground. More building, 1925, construction of 2 more, lots of stuff happening. I promised you mayhem. A couple of guys, I'll just skim this. A couple of guys went to Marlborough one week in December, attended a time at a club. They made the acquaintance of 2 girls. First problem. And decided to remain in Marlborough overnight. These guys were from Boston. Unable to attain a room, they were told by a Marlborough man that he had a cottage on Lake Boone, and he would see they were put up there overnight. Number 2. He went with them to the lake, producing a key, opened the door of the cottage owned by Michael McNiff of Hudson, which he had no right. He left them and returned to Marlborough. Pierce told the court it was so cold within the cottage, which was without fuel and none obtainable outside, that in order to keep warm, they broke up the furniture and started a blaze in the fireplace. In order to keep from freezing, it was necessary to keep the fire burning. And to do this, a kitchen table, 11 chairs, 3 commodes, and a dresser was smashed into plywood and piled on the blaze. And it goes on. But got some real winners those days. But rowdyism, it was a real problem. The police were always being called. There's some sort of humorous stories. Just the opposite, some tragic stories. I read all the newspapers, and between 1900 and 1950, 22 people drowned. And they were almost all people from elsewhere out in a canoe who couldn't swim. And they weren't all just young people. I mean, it was just crazy. Store burnt. 1930, Red Cross swimming starts down at Hanson's Beach. Some of us will well remember those days. John Spinney and then his daughter Eleanor were doing the swimming classes, and then later a variety of other people. Lower Main Street curve eliminated. As you come down Lower Main Street and going towards Sudbury, and you pass the general store, and then on your left is Rock Avenue, and then slightly past that is Old County Road, which kind of loops in and around. That was the original road. It did not go straight. That wasn't until the 1930s. Hanson's store opens then. Oh, the Torch murder. That's what you came to hear. You want to hear the bloodthirsty bit. Hunter Ave was laid out quite late. We sometimes think it wasn't. The big hurricane, the Lake Boone Commission, and the dance pavilion at some point becomes a very successful, very well-known roller skating rink. The Association Hall, which a number of us will remember from the old days. This is Barbara Clancy's place. This is Barton Road here. And we're pretty much directly across from Fisher and Birchfield in that picture I showed you much earlier, this being Sunset Road. Well, it belonged to the Catholic Association. It was built by them, used as a church and other events, because it was really the only sizable building that you could have events. But some of us will remember, probably not quite this early, but out behind here were the running races on Labor Day Saturday. And the swimming races were Monday morning, Monday noon they were done. Everybody went home, they had stuff packed, they were gone. By Monday night, the lake was dead. So the Association Hall was down behind here. Nope. Yeah, quite a ways. I think much beyond where the hall was, but.
And in the previous picture, what was the ground cover back then? In that picture there, what is that ground?
I think what had happened is this was cleared. And I think what was happening is this was scrub, starting to grow back up. Kind of gets the feeling of low oak. But it clearly was cleared because that's all the same height. And I'm going to guess that's 30s, something like that. The lake is behind us. Yeah. The Narrows, between the first and the second, is behind us. It does, yes. It's one of 4 stone houses that I know of. I live in one. There's another one across the street that Uncle built. There's one off North Shore Drive. And then there is this one. Kind of a neat house. Okay, Twilight Club. That, by the way, was right here. What you just saw was right here. Twilight Club was right along here. Here's the Narrows. Very famous picture. It's on the front of one of Lou's and Alan's books. This is a club formed very early. Now about where Shirley Birchfield's house is. This, if you go straight across into that stone house that you just saw. And at the very beginning, the picture that looked across the lake to the gully was in West Fishers, up here, looking across that way. Well, it doesn't show here. So I think it was developed to be able, as a boat ramp. Somebody. Okay. Monahans. Monahans Cove is over here to the right. This is an adjacent store, separate from Monahans. This is Temple, and Worcester is right there. I would know nothing about this club, what went on, but I have been told by old people that there were untoward things happening in this. I'm told. Know nothing about it by my elders. But very well known, probably more in and around Boston than it was here, because people came from everywhere. And not so much now, but 10, 20, 30 years ago, I was in Boston teaching, and I would say Hudson, Monahans. It was amazing. Partly from this, and I suspect also the skating rink, which was very popular.
Was frequently mentioned in police law.
Might have been. Yeah, I wouldn't know about that. We lived over in the good section. This was 1948, an ad. That's the corner now. Okay, this is from the lake, second basin, looking into Monahans Cove. Here is the back, the very end of Monahans. This is the initially dance pavilion, which somewhere in the late 30s became a skating rink. Roller skating. And we'll have more to say about that in the next trip. Oh, yes. Well, I'm shocked at this as well. I love this. Anybody a speller? Merriment? Apparently. New ruling handed down crackdown on improper wearing of apparel. This rule follows one issue last season when the wearing of shorts on Hudson's Main Street was banned. Can you imagine wearing shorts on Main Street? Well, at least they're awake out there. Okay. Yeah, who's the speller? Okay, clubs. Decline in clubs. Well, there were many clubs, and I'll have a list of about 20 or 30 of them, at least that I had by name. Some large, like the Twilight Club, and others were transitory. But 1940, upon checking up who was occupying the cottages this season, has found that all the clubs are to be found in the vicinity of Cove Landing. Some of you people are in that part of the lake. No wonder we didn't know anything about it. We weren't allowed to go cohort with those people. Well, moving to the very north end, this is the famous Hanson's beach. Very popular. Swim beach. Pinball machines. Garage. Where's what? I should have put that out.
When did they drop the E? When did it go up to Lake Boone?
Oh, God. Oh. I didn't hear that.
Sorry.
We'll try that next time. Okay. Well, it's changed quite a bit. This is Mike Parishow's place. And Mike still has the sign, which is, I don't know, what, 6 or 8 feet high and 100 feet long? About 10,000 pounds?
That weighs a lot.
Yes, in 2 parts. There's an old metal sign and a big frame, and Mike has it in the garage.
What's it say?
Hey.
Lake Boone.
Does, you know, the beach and how much it costs for monthly lockers and, you know, ice cream. And
I got pictures of it, I think we see it next time. Yeah, but it's immense. I'd like to see you move that sometime. Okay, we're just about there, so hang in. What we call the MO dump, early 40s, taken by the military for the war. Monahan, you see it's spelled both ways. I couldn't get it right. Sam's Provisions, which became the general store. He came out in 48. The milk bottle murder, that was the juicy one. Things began to happen, eutrophication in the lake in the 60s, Labor Day, all kinds of things happening. Camps got converted to year-round homes. I can remember in the late 50s, early 60s especially, going down to the lake in the winter, you would see maybe 1 or 2 lights on Second Basin. Then the next year, a couple more lights, and then this year, a couple more. But the days of a townhouse and a country summer cottage were disappearing rapidly. And now I hardly think there are very many seasonal. Okay, 3 murders. We're going to end right here. 3 murders. The first one, about which we know virtually nothing. There was apparently a guy who lived down on the south shore of the Third Basin, a recluse. Nobody knew anything about him. One time somebody was canoeing down there. They passed somebody in a boat that had a gun, rifle. Didn't think about it. And then they went on, heard a rifle shot. They came back and found, I think his name is here somewhere, found the poor guy, Amos Kratt, had been shot, died in the water. That's about all they know. Don't know much of anything about it beyond that. The second murder, this was the so-called torch murder. This was pretty bizarre. Frank DiStasio from Revere. No, but he certainly was from Revere with a name like that. He and his son, or at least dad, wanted to collect life insurance. So he was in Boston, picked up a guy he either knew or didn't know somewhere in the West End. They came out to Lower Main Street. Now, if you can envision where Lower Main Street and Temple is, okay, everybody with me? Just past Parmenter. And you go a little further, somewhere between Temple and Main, and what's the first industry there before Polybag? Okay, but does everybody know about where we are? Okay, so somewhere there, the father, he told the son to drive another car and meet him there. So the father came out with this guy he picked up. Apparently killed the guy, stuffed him in the back seat, poured gas over him, and burnt him. Hopped out of the car, so he didn't get burnt, and took off with the son. Fire department came, car burning up. They thought, so they were poking around the car. They pulled up the back seat. Oh my God, there's this body. What didn't burn? So after going through all of this sort of stuff, it turned out they got Frank and they got the son, Anthony, went to court and convicted the father. And in those days, this was mid-30s, sent him to the hot chair. Gone. The son, forgotten what happened to the son. He was collecting insurance because he was, sorry, I didn't make that clear. He was trying to pass off the burnt guy in the car as him. So the son could collect the money. Sorry. Make sense? No. No. Oh, here's the good one. Now, if you turn down Temple, you go down, Proctor is on your right, and you come to the junction, Hunter bears to the left, Temple bears to the right. There's a house right there called the Junction, in those days, the Junction Luncheonette, run by a Joseph Durand. Apparently no relation to the current Durands that we know, because I asked him all about it. Not important. But in that house, the Soucies lived, George and Lumina Soucy, and they ran a luncheonette there. This is about 1951. The Lumina's brother wanted to collect insurance on the sister, and I've kind of forgotten how the deal was, but that was the motive. Now, she was a little bitty thing, like 150 pounds, and he was kind of a big guy. But they get into a fight, and according to the story, he got a milk bottle, broke the milk bottle, and did her in, and I won't go into the gory details. She died. So the husband comes home and says, oh, God. So it was quite clear, and the brother was twice the size, and he claimed that she came after him. Didn't wash. So he took off for parts unknown, mostly north. He actually went almost to Canada. But they finally got him, and bail for grand jury, confesses, they leaned on him, enters plea of innocence, which you have to do. Oh, this is the brother, Oscar DeRoches. Found in Lawrence, and was on trial, pled not guilty, so forth. And he gets 15 to 20 years. Beating his sister to death. So if any of you have a sister, who is this person? Oh, it's my very much older sister. Hi. No, because there's no insurance. Believe me. Some people are just getting it. Okay, there you go. You are released. Thank you for coming.
The other thing I'd like to mention is that during the walkathon in mid-October, these historic posters will be posted around the lake where those buildings were.
I have one quick question for you. I'm Nancy Shepherd. I live on Harvard Road, so I don't know much about the lake.
Nancy.